B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, September 10th, 2018. There's a climate change party happening this week right here in San Francisco. Hosted by outgoing Governor Jerry Brown, who is completing his fourth term as the chief executive here in California. And Jerry Brown is building legacy. He is continuing a fight that he has been engaged in for a while. He thumbs his nose at Trump for inaction on climate change and for pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement that Obama entered into. And Jerry Brown deserves credit up to a point. He's hosting this summit, gathering people from all over the world. We've got Al Gore here and Van Jones and former Secretary of State John Kerry, and representation from many nations around the world. And as far as that goes, I have no problem. To burnish his credentials on the issue and to generate more support for his battle, mostly against Trump. Today, it was announced that Brown has signed new legislation to block offshore drilling in federal waters off the coast of California with a clever bill, actually a pair of them, that will ban construction of the infrastructure needed to support pipelines, docks, all the stuff, you can get the oil out of the sea, but you have to then transfer it to land either through pipelines or through tanker vessels, and this bill will block that. And today, to launch the summit and get a real good media optic, Jerry Brown signed a bill that was passed by the legislature just a week or two ago, Senate Bill 100, which sets a goal for 100% renewable energy by 2045. I think this is great. Now, there are issues about how we're actually going to store the renewable energy that is generated, and I know that people are working on that. So this is aspirational, and I think it's great. I fully support this. But over the weekend, there were protests in San Francisco. And the media picked up on it. The front page of today's San Francisco Chronicle shows protesters with signs critical of Trump. But the Chronicle chose not to include any photos of people with signs critical of Jerry Brown. And there's a lot to criticize. And you've heard some of it here on this podcast. Jerry Brown sat idly by as a huge methane leak from Porter Ranch in Southern California continued to spew and spew and spew for months. And not only was public health impacted locally, but the emissions from Porter Ranch essentially nullified all of the good behavior, the emissions reductions, the hybrid cars that people drive. The emissions from Porter Ranch essentially wiped out 3 to 5 years of reductions in carbon emissions. Then there are all of the issues related to fracking. Jerry Brown has turned a blind eye to the negative side of fracking, the wastewater issues, the seismic impact in an earthquake state like California. And he resisted over the last 8 years any effort to significantly restrain or eliminate fracking in California. Hundreds of new oil leases were written while Jerry Brown was governor, some of them offshore. And he just signed the law to prevent that oil from coming onshore. Then there was the big photo opportunity when he got former Governor Schwarzenegger to come out of whatever he came out of. I don't know where Arnold is these days. He put his Twitter down long enough to stop attacking Trump and showed up for a photo op where Brown, with a flourish, signed legislation to extend Schwarzenegger's cap-and-trade law. And I don't believe that cap-and-trade has a very significant impact, but I'm not opposed to it. But Jerry Brown's cap-and-trade added another and. It was cap-and-trade and preemption. And if you've heard my interview with Mark Perchik for Who, What, Why, I'll be posting it here at peterbcollins.com tomorrow. Preemption is a really ugly process where corporations usually buy politicians who then use their influence to do the bidding of the corporations. And the most recent example wasn't related to oil, but Big Soda came to California, threatening to pass a ballot initiative that would tie the hands of local government trying to raise taxes ever. And they blackmailed Brown and the legislature into passing a 12-year preemption on any new soda taxes by local or county governments. It was a really ugly process. And so when you look at the full record of Jerry Brown on climate-related issues, it is mixed at best. And I'll save this for when we believe he is actually going to sign it, and I don't know if that'll be in the next week or two. He's got till the end of the month. But the legislature, after saying that they had reached a dead end and would not have a bailout bill for PG&E, the rogue utility, they passed one. It's on the governor's desk. It's a bailout that passes along to ratepayers the liability for PG&E's negligence in the wine country fires last October. $18 billion is the estimated liability. And PG&E, once again, has its way with the state of California. We'll talk about that in more detail if and when the governor signs that. Now, Jerry Brown is a complicated guy. I have known him since his out years after his first stint as governor. Talked with him many times, followed him. And I do have something nice to say about Jerry Brown, because he has been the most generous governor in recent history. You got to go back to the 1940s to find a governor who was more generous, more compassionate, by giving relief to convicted felons, convicted drug offenders. He has granted more commutations and paroles and pardons than the last 3 or 4 governors combined. Schwarzenegger only granted 15 pardons. His predecessor, Gray Davis, a Democrat, had 0. Pete Wilson, only a handful. Jerry Brown has given out more than 1,100, including controversial ones to 20 people who had been convicted of murder or murder-related offenses, who were serving life sentences, and now they have been commuted to life with the possibility of parole. He's not releasing those people. He is giving them a path to some possible redemption in the future. And as somebody who cares deeply about these issues and about wrongful convictions, I applaud the governor for his approach to criminal justice in this particular respect. Now, speaking of wrongful convictions, the National Registry of Exonerations has issued a new report looking at all the known false convictions going back to 1989. The 2,265 men, I believe they're all men, who have been exonerated, served a combined 20,000 years behind bars. 20,080 to be precise. And that loss is something that can never be recovered. Now, they've paid out over $2.2 billion to these wrongfully convicted individuals, but that does not give them their lives back. It doesn't replace the time they were isolated from their families. And, of course, there's a racial component. Black people are more likely to be wrongly convicted. They make up 12% of the population, but 46% of exonerees. And collectively, they represent 56% of the life years lost to prison. And one guy who's not going to need to beg Donald Trump for a pardon is George Papadopoulos. After all of the drama that Robert Mueller has generated about Papadopoulos and his role in brokering contacts with Russia, who then meddled in the election and handed it to Trump, I mean, it's almost farcical. 14 days in jail is the sentence that George Papadopoulos has drawn for lying to the FBI. And absent any further charges, they are possible, it appears to expose that there's really not much there. Now, let me freely say, because people jump on me and call me some sort of a Russia stooge or a Trump sympathizer, I think Trump is guilty of obstruction of justice. I think the Michael Cohen plea deal shows that. I also think that he's guilty of felonies related to election law. And that is sufficient to lead to impeachment, use the 25th Amendment, demand his resignation. And what do you hear from Democrats? Near silence. They're not pushing to get Trump out of office right now. They're playing this stealth game, and I had a great conversation with a friend at an event over the weekend, and he's saying, Peter, I think the Democrats are trying to be too liberal, too progressive. And my friend, his name is also Peter, said that he doesn't support Tom Steyer's call for impeachment now. And I explained to my friend as nicely as I could that I just think that he is wrong. And the Democratic leadership is too timid. They're looking at polls instead of showing leadership. And last week when we learned about the insider coup at the White House, the adults in the room who are running the show, who pocket memos so Trump can't sign them, that is un-American, and it's unacceptable to me. Sure, it's nice to have this anonymous guy take potshots at Trump that echo what Bob Woodward's book says. But we know the White House is out of control. We don't need any additional evidence. The Democrats are wringing their hands and trying to snuff out the progressive insurgents across the country. And there is the limited possibility that the Democrats will regain control of the House in November. But the lack of leadership on so many different issues is what I think is at the core of the weakness of Democratic performance. Oh yeah, Bob Mueller got something wrong. He's admitted that the prosecutors on his team were mistaken when they claimed that Maria Butina, the red-headed Russian who loves guns and the NRA, and who they framed, let me use the right word, who they characterized as a Russian spy and a bit of a sex pot, who used her sexual appeal to pursue her spycraft. Well, they're now saying that the prosecutors were mistaken in interpreting what was apparently joking text exchanges between Ms. Butina and a friend who had helped her renew her car insurance. And it had been so difficult that he said, well, what's it going to take? And she said, well, I guess sex. And I don't know her personal life. There are claims that this Republican operative from Iowa that she was shacking up with, that was just a matter of convenience to advance her spy goals. And I don't know what the relationship is like. I simply have no basis to make a judgment. But the way Maria Butina has been pushed forward, locked up without bail, essentially silenced, and then painted as some sort of a sex pot, I just find that irresponsible on the part of the prosecution. And it's not the first time we've seen that happen in American criminal justice. Recently, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, signed a good piece of legislation setting up a commission to investigate prosecutors who break the law and lead to wrongful convictions in many cases. He set up a commission, and then he said he's going to change it. So I believe he did that under the duress of being challenged from his left in the gubernatorial primary, which occurs this Thursday. And Cynthia Nixon, the Sex and the City star, who is a mom who's come out late in life as a lesbian, she's run a spirited campaign. I watched the debate that she only got one debate with Cuomo, but I thought she managed that very well. And I haven't seen any polling to suggest that Cynthia Nixon can pull off a big upset on Thursday and win the Democratic Party's nomination and from there, presumably, the governorship. But the Cuomo team is running so scared, with slimy mailers being sent here at the last minute, that maybe Nixon is going to pull off an upset. I'd love to see it. So the latest smear is that somebody aligned with the Cuomo campaign put out a mailer saying that she is soft on anti-Semitism. Now, She responded, let's get her response first. I'm the mother of Jewish children whose grandparents narrowly survived the Holocaust and had a lot of family who didn't survive. The idea that they would accuse me of being soft on anti-Semitism is an outrage. Well, what they hit her on is that the inexperienced Cynthia Nixon won't stand strong for our Jewish communities. And I'm trying to read a fuzzy printout here. It says that she supports BDS, the racist, xenophobic campaign, to something, I can't read the verb there, to hurt Israel. Anyway, this is just dirty politics as usual, but it has the special anti-Semitic element to it because Andrew Cuomo has joined forces with extreme Zionists and imposed executive orders that squelch support for boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israel by Americans who wish to express themselves. It's a clear violation of the First Amendment, and to build on that with a smear against Nixon because she supports BDS, well, I think it reveals a lot about Cuomo, and I hope voters will act on that on Thursday. Every day I pause for a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Recent payments have come into PayPal from Benny Alto in Oregon, Patrick Gray, Ed Berwick right here in the Bay Area, and Andrew Harnack. They all kick in $5 a month. Oh, Ed Berwick just renewed an annual subscription. Thank you there, Ed. At any rate, I haven't announced your name recently, have I? Well, if it's because you're not a subscriber, let's fix that, will you? Come on over to peterbcollins.com. Find the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page, and boom, you can choose $5, $10, $20 a month, the $50 annual subscription. I've got a bonus gift if you take out a new annual and give me a mailing address in the continental U.S. That is a copy of John Dist's rock and roll CD, a brand new one called American University. I highly recommend it. I'd like to add it to your collection. So let's do a little transaction. What do you say? And Jason Spitzer decided he's not going to use PayPal anymore, so he converted to a subscription and is mailing in a check. You can do that too. My mailing address is Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Box 150, 660, San Rafael, 94915. Well, the CBS network was an important part of my career in radio. I worked for CBS briefly in Chicago and then for about 8 years here in San Francisco. And it was a different company at the time. You know, the Tisch brothers took it over. They were the tobacco billionaires. And, it really changed the tone and the esprit de corps at CBS. And in the last 15 years, the company's been run by Les Moonves, as the primary ownership is Viacom. The late Sumner Redstone was the key player there. So Moonves, who's had a long battle with Redstone and now Redstone's daughter, was forced out of CBS by the board last night after Ronan Farrow published a second tell-all in The New Yorker, adding 6 new women to the original 6 who charged that Les Moonves had made inappropriate sexual advances. So, what is interesting to me is that Moonves, as a CEO, is treated very different, even from a top star at the network like Charlie Rose. Now, I was never a big fan of Charlie Rose. I thought he was a phony intellectual poser, and, I just never gravitated to his work. But when he was outed and then dismissed from CBS within hours, and all of his work scrubbed from CBS, from PBS, there was never any process. There was never any way of evaluating how serious these charges were and whether the penalty fit the crime. But Les Moonves is in line to walk away with a golden parachute of more than $120 million. Now, there is one line in his contract that may allow them to deny him severance payment, but, that's not going to happen. The people on the board at CBS were all friends of Les Moonves. Will they deny him his final grab for cash at the trough? I'll be surprised if that happens, and I'll be happy to acknowledge it if I'm wrong. Jeffrey Beauregard, Jim Crow Sessions III, who's been publicly and ritually humiliated by his boss, Donald Trump, is at least taking a cue from one or more of the president's tweets, because the Justice Department is going deep on a bizarre theory that North Carolina, which is the laboratory for voter suppression tactics, every available tactic has been used in North Carolina. And despite that, Jeff Sessions and his folks at the quote-unquote Justice Department are demanding 8 years of information from North Carolina's Division of Motor Vehicles. And the theory is that people who went to get a driver's license were given a voter registration form, and that foreign-born non-citizens who didn't produce a driver's license as proof of identification or displayed non-immigrant visas or other documents that reflect the applicant was not a United States citizen, well, the theory is that there are a lot of those people who happen to game the system and then vote in 2016. Now, I consider this to be a fool's errand. I'd love to see an honest evaluation of the claim against the evidence that they collect. But what this will enable is some cherry picking, and they might find one or two people who actually achieved this and then claim that this is a widespread phenomenon. Get ready for that. The retrograde Jeff Sessions is also a point man threatening cities across the country, San Francisco, Philly, New York, Seattle, who want to set up safe injection sites. This is a response to the 60,000 Americans or more who died as a result of the opioid crisis last year. And many of them who lose their prescription for OxyContin or a similar drug, well, they resort to heroin. And when they are injecting themselves, they often don't know that there's fentanyl in their heroin or that there are other elements there. And many of them overdose and die. And so in trying to reduce harm, forward-looking cities are saying, even though there's a lot of controversy and a lot of resistance, that one approach is to set up safe injection sites and have nurses there not to conduct the injections, but to monitor people in the event of an overdose and then administer naloxone or some other antidote. Now, they trotted out Rod Rosenstein to lead this charge. He's the Deputy Attorney General. Because federal law clearly prohibits injection sites, cities and counties should expect the Department of Justice to meet the opening of any injection site with swift and aggressive action. I mean, who cares if more people die, right? The law is more important, and it must be upheld. Front page on the New York Times Sunday, a fascinating piece that confirms that the Trump administration held secret meetings with rebellious military officers from Venezuela over the past year to discuss ways to support their efforts to overthrow President Nicolas Maduro. Now, this is something that I have long suspected. I believe that Obama and his administration were doing what they could to undermine the Venezuelan government and promote a coup there. Now, the Times goes to great length here to describe this, and they claim they talked to, a dozen people, most of whom would not identify themselves. And according to the official story, American officials eventually decided not to help the plotters, and the coup plans stalled. But we saw in August, Maduro was giving a speech when drones were flown into the venue, and one of them set off an explosion. We've also seen other attempts to undermine or overthrow both the Chavez government and its successor, the Maduro regime, as it's known in Western media circles. So I'm skeptical of the limited hangout here. I believe that the U.S. has been actively engaged in trying to undermine or support the overthrow of the Maduro government. And the part of the Times reporting that I don't accept is the claim that American officials decided not to support the plot. Little truth-telling on the next page of Sunday's New York Times. This is page 812. Headline, How the U.S. Government Misleads the Public on Afghanistan. Tomorrow, September 11th, and this is the month where we look at the grisly 17th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. And when the Times talks about misleading information, for example, the U.S. government says that the Taliban controls or contests 44% of the turf in Afghanistan. But military analysts say the actual number is over 60%, an estimated 61%. When we talk about the strength of the Taliban, and we get the kill numbers, and you start to think, okay, well, there are fewer Taliban than there used to be. Well, of course, they can recruit new members. Well, we claimed that the Taliban has somewhere between 25,000 and 60,000 fighters, and that's against a claim of 314,000 armed Afghan troops. But the real number of Afghan troops is only a third. It's a third less, about 207,000. And the number of the Taliban, estimated by military intelligence, is 77,000 today, not 60,000. And so we have a very grim situation there. And it's what I call the whatever war, because it chugs on and on and on. And my nephew Liam is currently serving in Afghanistan. And most Americans don't give a shit. It's like, whatever, man. You know, Al-Qaeda. And related to Afghanistan is the latest salvo coming out of the Trump administration. This time the point man is John Bolton, exposing that the U.S. is, in fact, a rogue nation. Because we are now threatening sanctions on the judges and prosecutors of the International Criminal Court. Why? Because they want to examine war crimes by American troops in Afghanistan. Bolton will have none of it. We will ban its judges and prosecutors from entering the United States. We'll sanction their funds in the U.S. financial system. We'll prosecute them in the U.S. criminal system. We'll do the same for any company or state that assists in an ICC investigation of Americans. Yes, we are above the law. We are above reproach, above being investigated and judged. And this is the thing that Bolton's had a hard-on for so many years back in the Bush administration. He was the lead guy trying to prevent the United States from joining the court, and he succeeded. Under the Obama administration, we didn't join the court, but we occasionally, when it was convenient for us, supported certain investigations. But Bolton claims that the ICC is just a dastardly plot against the United States. Quote, the largely unspoken, always central aim of its most vigorous supporters was to constrain the United States. The objective, not limited to targeting individual U.S. service members, but rather America's senior political leadership and its relentless determination to keep our country secure. Well, we've had no accountability for torture, for the lies that led to Iraq, or for John Bolton, for that matter. And here we are. And at The Guardian, Simon Tisdall has a great op-ed today where he takes on this attack on the ICC. He talks about the history. He talks about the situation related to Afghanistan. And he sums it up by saying that this looks like the unacceptable face of American exceptionalism. And, unfortunately, he is correct. Also at The Guardian, they've hired David Sirota. And while it may not be the exact replacement for Thomas Frank, his tone and his perspectives are quite similar. And Sirota debuts with a column today taking on the Democratic Party at the federal and state level. And he says that California should have led the way on a single-payer health care system. and that Governor Brown and the current democratically controlled legislature have failed. And Sirota, who's done a lot to expose corruption in New Jersey under Chris Christie, he says state Democratic lawyers who spent years slamming Chris Christie for refusing to pass a millionaire's tax quickly delayed and then watered down the same tax proposal when Democrats reclaimed the governorship. Across the Hudson, Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo shut down an anti-corruption commission. His top aide was later convicted on corruption charges, and yet Cuomo's rewarded with support from top Democrats as well as an endorsement from the New York Times. And he talks about Colorado, Chicago. There's a lot of good information and critical commentary that David Sirota presents here. He says it's 16 Democrats in the Senate voting to help Wall Street lobbyists gut post-financial crisis banking regulations, including blue staters like Colorado Senator Bennett and Delaware Coons, the latter of which then went on to make national headlines slamming progressives for supposedly pushing the party too far to the left. So you get a taste of this, and I encourage you to read it. He closes by saying that this may bewilder the Democrats' permanent political class that has gotten used to steamrolling the public, losing elections, and still remaining in charge of the party. But really, the only confusing thing about this uprising is that it took this long to finally ignite. One more item from The Guardian. Last week, I didn't have time to get to this, but they tracked down the sequence of events that led to the doctored photos of Trump's inauguration that were coughed up by the National Park Service. And using the Freedom of Information Act, they learned that calls from the White House to the director of the National Park Service led him to lean on the photographer to carefully crop the photos to make it look like there were actually more people at Trump's inauguration than there were. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You'll find it on YouTube, and I hope you'll share it far and wide. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.